Now, as we get into Daniel chapter 9, Daniel starts out by saying, in the first year of Darius, and this Darius, most commentators suggest the most likely timing and the person being identified here, Darius was either a sub-ruler who had been appointed by Cyrus or is another name for Cyrus himself. That Daniel may have very well been referring to Cyrus, because this certainly seems to be in the early part of Cyrus's reign, maybe right at the start of Cyrus's reign. And so this, the name of Darius is not exactly certain who exactly this is, but it really seems most likely to be referring to Cyrus. And if this is the first year of Cyrus, which does seem very appropriate for the remainder of this chapter, that it would be 12 years after the events of Daniel chapter 8. So 12 years later, we're getting back into this. And so shortly after, Daniel was taken into Babylon initially, way back when he was 15 years old. Soon after that, Jeremiah prophesied of 70 years of exile and captivity to Babylon. This is recorded in Jeremiah chapter 25. So if we count from roughly the time that Jeremiah prophesied that, which would be right around 605 BC, and then to approximately when Cyrus gave his decree to release exiles back into the land, then we get to about 68 years, which is kind of a rough estimate, a round way of getting to 70 years, not quite exact. But it really does seem to be that Daniel is recognizing this. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, perceived in the books the number of years that, according to the word of Jeremiah the prophet, must pass before the end of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. So he's got Jeremiah 25. He might not have had it in the very early part of his time in Babylon, but by this point, clearly, Daniel has now access to the later prophecies of Jeremiah, and he's recognizing that it seems like the 70 years may be coming to pass. Cyrus is now king. There's talk of the exiles being released, and maybe we're coming to the end of these 70 years. And this is exactly what Daniel's recognizing kind of in real time as he's seeing this prophecy kind of come to fulfillment in his lifetime. So then he turns his face to the Lord and he offers this awesome prayer. This realization prompted Daniel to offer one of the most exemplary prayers recorded in Scripture. It's an intercession on behalf of his people. And there are some great characteristics of this prayer that are specific to praying for their release from Babylonian captivity. And so I'm not going to dive into it so much here in the video, but there's more information about this prayer included in the notes. And we should take time at a later time to cover it in more detail. But for now, we're going to skip over it and get to Gabriel's answer to this prayer. Because Gabriel's answer, even though Daniel's praying about their release from Babylonian captivity in Daniel's generation, Gabriel comes and actually reveals more about the generation of the end of the age. It's amazing how heaven answers this prayer with a response pertaining to the end of the age. It's remarkable. And here I'll just look at the very end of this prayer. It's great. He says, "Now therefore, O God, listen to the prayer of your servant and to his plea for mercy, and for your own sake, your name's sake, O Lord. Make your face to shine upon your sanctuary, which is, at this day, desolate in Daniel's time. O my God, incline your ear and hear, open your eyes and see our desolations in the city that is called by your name. For we do not present our pleas before you because of our righteousness." It's not because we deserve it, not because of our righteousness, but because of your great mercy. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, pay attention and act. It's awesome prayers. Delay not for your own sake, O my God, because your city and your people are called by your name. It's remarkable. And so the response that comes is a response describing God's plan to answer this prayer in a permanent way in the Messianic age. It's so fascinating. So here we go. Gabriel brings an answer, and this is where I'm going to jump in a little bit more. So, while I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin, remarkably, it's like at the time, as Daniel is praying, Gabriel comes and arrives. We don't know exactly how long Daniel was praying. We can't be sure how much time elapsed during Daniel's prayer, but Gabriel has spent time traveling to Daniel to deliver this response. And most amazing of all, Daniel reveals heaven's esteem. Did I say that right? Most amazing of all, Gabriel reveals heaven's esteem for Daniel. So while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, who I had seen in the vision at first, which is Daniel 8, came to me in swift flight at the time of the evening sacrifice. He made me understand, speaking with me, saying, "O Daniel, I've come now to give you insight and understanding." At the beginning of your pleas for mercy, a word went out. As soon as he started praying, Gabriel was sent, and there's apparently time that elapsed for him to travel from heaven to Daniel. How that works, I don't exactly know, but this is how it happened for Daniel. "And I have come to tell you, for you are greatly loved." Amazing. To have been an intercessor, to have been Daniel in that time, praying this prayer of repentance, and for heaven to respond with this message of your prayers have been heard and you are greatly loved. That is amazing. Therefore, consider the word and understand the vision. Here we go. So, starting in verse 24, I've got this in the notes as well. 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city. This is exactly what Daniel was praying about right up here in verse 19, because your city and your people are called by your name. And so here, Gabriel comes to say exactly what's going to happen pertaining to the people and city, the full fulfillment of Daniel's prayer. 70 weeks are decreed to finish. Now, for particular reasons, these 70 weeks have a purpose. And the purposes are to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin. Now, finishing the transgression is interesting. Sin will be allowed to escalate until every opportunity for repentance is exhausted and humanity is ripe for accountability. When the final transgressions have been completed, and it's time then for the answer from heaven and for judgment to come, to put an end to sin. The day of the Lord's vengeance comes to destroy those who stubbornly persist in sin, to atone for iniquity, meaning the consequences of sin that creation has endured for centuries and millennia will be restored. All those consequences of sin will be removed to bring about an everlasting to bring in everlasting righteousness. The Messianic age will usher in an era of global peace and righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, which commentators go back and forth about exactly what he's referring to here, but it really seems to be that God will confirm his covenant. He's going to verify and authenticate his prophetic words throughout history and in the biblical narrative, to seal it up and prove it as true, and finally to anoint a most holy place, which is God fulfilling his promises for the temple in Jerusalem in the Messianic age. Those are the reasons. And so as we look at this, there's this lens of what all of these different events are being orchestrated to accomplish. And that's a very important perspective, that we would look at it through the lens of these, is it 6 goals? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 goals. Amazing. Of course, this is not like the all-encompassing list. I'm sure you could characterize it different ways. But in this scenario, this is how the angel Gabriel described it to Daniel. And that's important for us to recognize too. Know, therefore, and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem and the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there will be 7 weeks. Now, what is with these weeks? Well, if you've studied Daniel at all, then you probably have heard that these weeks are often characterized as 7 periods of 7 years. You could have a week of days, 7 days, which we commonly understand today, but it's also common for there to have been weeks of years back in Daniel's time. And so we have these 70 periods of 7 years. So total, if you had 70 weeks, 70 periods of 7 years, then you would have a total of 490 years. Now, Gabriel divides these 77s into 3 periods. There's 7 sevens, which is 49 years. There's 62 sevens, which would be a following 434 years. And then there's one final period of 7 years that concludes with the inauguration of the Messianic age. And so scholars differ a lot on when to place the first 69 weeks, that 49 and 62 combined together to be the 69 initial weeks. we know that that final week, that final 70th week precedes the coming of the Messiah and the establishing of the Messianic age. But those 69 weeks prior are a kind of a mysterious thing in history of exactly when to place them. The angel provides more detail about the final week, seems to emphasize more the final week, the 70th week, than the first 69 weeks, which implies that there's less of an emphasis on knowing for certain the exact placement of those earlier weeks. The final week really appears to be the focus of the message. But it does seem that the angel predicts that the 69th week will conclude with the Messiah's first appearing. We'll get into more reasons why we understand that. But the Messiah would initially perish at the end of that 69th week, or after that 69th week. And then there would be this period of pause, and then there would be this 70th week that would come about. So how do we place it? I don't know, it's kind of hard to know. Let's just read a little bit more of the passage for a second. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, it's not clear who that would be. It could be a priest. It could be any Israelite that is given leadership to oversee the restoration of Jerusalem or the temple. There will be 7 weeks. That's 49 years. Then for 62 weeks, it shall be built again, meaning it like has it. It's not like the process of being built, but it's like it has been built with squares and a moat. And what those means, essentially, there are interpretations for those. They're not super relevant, but it'll be in a troubled time. It's not existing in a time of peace. It's not peacetime, which you could say are the days of Ezra and Nehemiah and later on through the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, which we talked a little bit about last week. We'll talk more about today. Then after the 62 weeks, which if you combine the 7 weeks and then the 62 weeks, after the 69 weeks, after that 69th week, an anointed one will be cut off and shall have nothing. Now that anointed one is interpreted really to be the Messiah. The word there used for an anointed one is a Messiah. A Messiah will be cut off and will have nothing. And the people of the prince, not necessarily the prince himself, but the people of the prince who is to come, a people who are acting as a representative. Whoops. Sometimes I click and it just takes me somewhere, but it's okay. A people of the prince who are operating according to, a representation of that prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, which most people interpret clearly to be the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. So there's this period of war to the end, this period of from that time to the end, there shall be war and desolations that are decreed. Then we get into more information about that 70th week. But before we jump to that, I just want to point out something. So the angel predicts that the 69th week would conclude with the Messiah's first appearing, and that the Messiah would initially perish. And so scholars have often used the lifetime of Jesus to trace a possible placement for the 69 weeks. So they kind of start with the life of Jesus and then kind of count backwards and see where they get to 69 weeks or 400 and what did we say the number was? But 483 years, however it is, counting backwards. Now, part of the reason why this interpretation is reinforced is because of some cross-references that I've included in the notes. In Isaiah 49, Isaiah clearly described the Messiah having 2 appearings. There was an appearing where the Messiah would be deeply despised and abhorred by the nation, but a second appearing where kings would bow down and submit themselves to the Messiah. Same thing in Isaiah 52. He says, "Behold, my servant will act wisely and he'll be lifted up." Lifted up on what? Probably lifted up on a cross. But he says, "As many were astonished by you, being that his appearing was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form far beyond that of the children of mankind." Now, when Jesus was lifted up on the cross, that would be an appropriate description of Jesus' condition at his first appearing. When he's lifted up the first time, he's marred beyond that of the children of mankind. But when he's lifted up the second time, kings will shut their mouths because of him. For that which has not been told, they will see. And that which they've not heard, they will come to understand. His kingship and his ruling. And Isaiah 53 as well. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him, to crush the Messiah. So there's this clear first coming where the Messiah is crushed, where he's lifted up, but his lifting up is marring beyond the recognition of human semblance. I mean, he's cut off. He's destroyed. He's not accepted. He's deeply despised and abhorred by Israel in his first appearing. And that's exactly what's being described here. And then shortly after that, we know, because of our benefit of history, that Rome did come and they destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. And so now there's this period of war desolations, essentially, that's passing. So just quickly to verify those 69 weeks, the most likely placement, according to scholars, the most likely placement for those 69 weeks in history seems to begin with the decree of Artaxerxes to Ezra in 458 BC. And so if you count forward 483 years across that troubled time of Ezra and Nehemiah, all the way through Antiochus Epiphanes, all the way through the ascension of Rome and the time of Jesus, you come to 26 AD, which is the year that scholars believe Jesus was baptized and began his ministry. So you exactly 483 years thereabouts. So Ezra, that decree from Artaxerxes to Ezra came in Ezra chapter 7. I have this in the notes. Artaxerxes, king of kings, to Ezra, the priest, the scribe of the law of God of heaven. Peace. I now make a decree that anyone of the people of Israel or their priests or Levites in my kingdom who freely go and offer yourself who freely offers to go to Jerusalem, that they may go with you. Now, there were several decrees, obviously, historically. You had the decree of Cyrus and a few others, and then you had this decree of Artaxerxes. And so that seems like the most likely, the most appropriate time when you would place that and still consider it an actual time of 69 sevens. Other scholars have taken it and totally symbolized it into oblivion. And all of those symbolic interpretations become very subjective and kind of lose their meaning in a way. Anyway, I talk about some of that a little bit more in the notes, but there you go. You have Rome after Jesus' death. Rome acts as the people of the prince who is to come. They destroy Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD, which marks then this unspecified period of war and desolations until the end, until that 70th week. So now we get into verse 27. Sorry, we've just been setting up for this. This is the end of Daniel 9, so that's why we're setting this up. We get into this 70th week, and it comes into focus in verse 27 with a figurehead who affirms a strong covenant for the duration of that 70th week, for 7 years. That he who affirms this covenant is the culmination of the prince who is to come from verse 26. And he is the little horn of Daniel 7, which we looked at last week. He's the Antichrist. Importantly, there's no exegetical interpretation of Daniel 9 that matches the timing of Antiochus Epiphanes. There's no way, historical, grammatically responsible, reasonable way that this figure being described here is Antiochus Epiphanes. There's no way that the 70th week is Antiochus Epiphanes, because it becomes very clear that the events of that 70th week result in the Messianic age. And that is absolutely not what came to pass during the Maccabean revolt and Antiochus, the defeat of Antiochus Epiphanes. You know what I mean? So that 70th week, there's no scholar that tries to take this and shoehorn this into Antiochus Epiphanes unless they really have some kind of exterior reason, some kind of systematic theology that forces them to interpret it this way. This is definitely pertaining to the Antichrist at the end of the age because it results in the Messianic age. And that's how very much Daniel would have understood it. And that is how later prophets and later biblical authors interpret this section. So appropriately, Antiochus Epiphanes is treated as an interim fulfillment and a historical foreshadowing of this person. In Daniel 9, verse 27, he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. And it's pretty clear that among the many, Israel is included among the many. It may not just be exclusive to Israel, but it is including Israel, absolutely, because the sacrifices and offerings are a factor of it. It's not exactly clear how much of a factor of it they are. Could the sacrifices and offerings existed before the establishing or affirming of this strong covenant? Maybe, but they're a factor for whatever reason. Gabriel is saying it has to do with this. So earlier prophets have already established that Israel will enter into a trade and security agreement with Gentile nations during that final rebellion preceding the tribulation. At some point, there's an up-and-coming leader that we read about in Daniel 7 who will affirm this subversive treaty. He doesn't necessarily create the treaty, because the Hebrew word for make here is not really make. The Hebrew word is more like he affirms it, or he confirms it, or he ratifies it in some sort of a way, but it's not necessarily that he drafted it and, it was his conception. It was more like he confirms it in some kind of a way. So it could be a pre-existing covenant, but at some point he affirms this subversive treaty for 7 years, and this treaty will include permission for Israel to enact at least the morning and evening offerings in Jerusalem with a functioning temple. So halfway through this false treaty, halfway through this week of years, the Antichrist will betray this treaty, halt the sacrifices, and desecrate the tribulation temple in Jerusalem until the decreed end of the day of the Lord's vengeance. So Daniel 7:25 clarifies that the length of the Antichrist's aggression will be a time, times, and half a time. Or that could be understood here as half of 7 years, meaning 3.5 years. That's the time. So, and on the wings of abomination he shall come, one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator, and he's defeated. But at for half a week, he will put an end to the sacrifices and offerings. Earlier prophets have also predicted that the Antichrist's betrayal will trigger a tribulation unlike any other period in history. Jeremiah 30, verse 7, it's a time that is unlike any other. That's there. Isaiah 28, when their covenant with death, essentially, in Isaiah 28, this is fascinating, because Israel uses this excuse to say, we've made a truce with our adversaries. More than that, we've made a truce with hell itself. We've come into alignment, not with God's covenant, but we've made a covenant that's going to ensure our security, because we've made a truce with all our adversaries, even hell itself. But Isaiah warns them, this covenant you've made with death is going to be broken. And the one who's going to break it is going to be the Antichrist halfway through that period of 7 years. Isaiah 24 as well, Isaiah says, I waste away, woe is me, because traitors have betrayed. And the betrayal of traitors, with betrayal, the traitors have betrayed. He's saying there's this epic betrayal that triggers this tribulation period that Isaiah goes on to describe in chapter 24. And it's grievous. It's a grievous deception. And that's going to conclude Daniel chapter 9, but it's going to go on. Daniel's going to go on. Not very long after, just 3 years later, Daniel 10 comes into play, and we'll cover that here in just a moment.